And so the team call up Ashley Visagie, who is from Bottom Up. And Ashley will be speaking to us about, so his talk is entitled Out of Place, Reflections on Dislocation and Displacement in Urban Township Schools. Thanks, Ashley.
So it's really interesting how we use spatial metaphors to talk about pretty much everything concerning human life. I'm feeling really into this music or into this theater, or I'm feeling out of it today. And today I want to attempt using also a spatial metaphor, but hopefully not just as a metaphor. But what does space mean in the context of education? And I put up this particular old newspaper clipping saying there's another sort of displacement that is happening in South Africa. We all see it once a year, come December time, even in January, when the newspapers begin to talk about matric results or school dropout and how many people are actually making it through the system. And I guess one of the points which I wish to make is that there's large-scale displacement and dislocation happening in the education system. But what is also interesting layered on top of this is that it seems that people who were once dispossessed of their land is now the same people who are also being dispossessed of their education. It's not unusual or uncommon that those who come from the poorest, or let's say the most oppressed spaces of Cape Town also seem to be, or of our country rather than Cape Town, also seem to be those who produce the worst results in this education system of ours. Layered on top of this, though, is something deeper, something which is more invisibilized in the topic for tonight. And there's a word which we give to this. It's called symbolic violence. Symbolic violence, sociologist, the French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu, says this is a gentle sort of violence, an imperceptible violence even, where those who experience this sometimes, or in fact, all of the time, most of the time, are not even conscious that it's being done to them. How does it happen? What does it do? It makes students feel out of place within a system, and we've seen some large-scale kind of protests happening in the university space concerning this feeling of, I feel out of place within this institution. Those conversations are not only relevant in tertiary spaces, they happen at school level in basic education as well. And they happen through various vehicles, through the language of the school, the culture of the school, and also the curriculum and content. Just by way of interest, how many of you know about Youth Day or 1976, the youth uprisings? You learned about this at school. Yeah. What about the 1980s student protests, which are possibly as significant, but is not necessarily included in our school curriculums? It's not, we don't have a special public holiday for this. But there's a certain grouping of people, even in Cape Town, for example, who seem to be marginalized and these stories aren't told. And we feel as if we are not part even of struggle and protest. What else does the symbolic violence do? It legitimizes unequal performances by telling stories like this one. It's about meritocracy, right? It's about those who work hard and make the right choices. And I think this was the story which most of my school teachers told to me. I'm involved in a study myself, and some of the things which I've recorded, some teachers saying to students, things like, it's up to you, man, it's entirely up to the person themselves. Don't talk to me about this poverty because anything is possible if you put your mind to it. Because of my choices and my willpower, I made decisions that brought me to where I am now. These are the kinds of narratives, for example, the messages which we hear from our teachers, from our parents, and possibly even from our church, that it's all about these things which we do, rather than about the systems, the structures, and these various encodings in school. What else does it do? It also produces self-blame. So if it really is all about me, and I haven't made it, then perhaps I'm to blame. Or perhaps my parents are to blame. Maybe they didn't work hard enough so that we can also be living here, or we can also be having this kind of house or this kind of lifestyle. So urban schools are producing academic failure at alarming rates. At the same time, they are doing this inside a systematic structural design that essentially predetermines their failure. Urban schools are not broken, they are doing exactly what they are designed to do. This, by the way, was from not South African context, but a US context, which you'll find, I mean, inequality is the same story the world over, right? It's all linked to our economy, it's all linked to capital, it's all linked to how this structures society. And so we can use these stories. This is as true over here as it is, for example, in the worst parts of the United States. We know the effects of the community are more powerful than those effects of schools, right? 1966, James Coleman did a report, and at that stage, what was most surprising was that actually out-of-school factors have more ability to determine how our students will do in schools than what happens in schools. So as much as the school might try, for example, the effects of the community, the effects of social poverty, community violence, trauma, like we've just heard, all of those effects are incredibly profound and impact on the lives of the student at school. We also understand from the research, we also understand how the multiple messaging systems of schools work. And these don't only work through what teachers say, like I've just mentioned, but they also work through the built environment of the school. What do buildings, what do spaces actually say to us? What do they communicate to us? Even where we're sitting now is arranged in a particular manner. The furniture allows us to move in and about the space in particular ways. What of the students sitting in the school where the window's broken, it's winter, it's cold in the classroom, there's a leaky roof, there's no toilet paper in the toilet. In fact, there are no toilets in the toilet. Right? What do those things communicate about who you are, your own identity, what it means to be a student? Right? All of these things communicate incredibly powerfully. We just heard about how there's theater, there's infrastructure needed to produce theater. There's also infrastructure needed to do schooling if we want to do it well. Classroom discourses, what teachers say, what teachers do, the curriculum, and even the teaching method, which seems to be still much focused on a traditional teaching style, where students are not encouraged to ask questions. Students are not encouraged to become critical about not just the curriculum, but also what's happening in the world, what's happening in the real world. How does this actually connect? How does what we're doing in this classroom link to actually my life outside of the school, my life beyond the school gates? The classroom seems to stop at the gates of the school and not extend beyond. And so students would say, oh, but this child can't concentrate, or this one's not good at mathematics. Yet we drive through a road like Blackbird Road in Parkwood on a Friday night, and we find people playing dominoes and other more sophisticated games, doing complex mathematics, perhaps, just not coded in the ways in which would give them the marks at school. By the way, the statistics over here is not representative of South Africa. This is taken from a particular ward in which the schools, in which the organization that I work with is located. So all of the data over here would be from the kind of greater Grassy Park, Lotus River area. And if you were to do this comparison on the website, we have taken it from Youth Explorer, which is basically an amalgamation of data, you will see how different this might be to a neighborhood like the one that we're sitting in currently. So 60% of students dropping out before matric, and 20% of students go on to have a bachelor pass in matric. So only 20% or 1 in 5 then would have the ability to even apply or think about tertiary education. That doesn't count into the fact all the issues we have related to fees and application forms that are so almost traumatic in themselves to complete and to gather all the necessary documents. We don't make those processes easy for people, right? So several factors position our students in some ways, another metaphor, this one by Carmen Mills, a researcher from Australia who looks at similar problems over there, and she calls it being positioned at the back of the field. Right? Our students are positioned at the back of the field. It's harder for them to score goals. It's harder for them to actually to produce the kinds of performances which we look for. Food insecure households. So I have a student whom we support who comes from a food insecure household. So for them what it means is they might eat 50 cents chips tonight, or they might eat some popcorn, and they might not necessarily know where tomorrow's meal is coming from. He's currently busy studying, but in a home like that, how do you actually begin to even pay for just the transport cost to get you to the university or to a CPUT every week? So those are the kind of problems our students face. Community violence. Just outside one of the schools in which we work, someone was shot earlier this week. It's not an uncommon experience in that area. Sometimes students have to look upon the dead bodies outside of their own homes or in their own streets. There's trauma, right? Trauma that we often don't talk about. We don't think about what effects this might have on things like education or learning. We just expect that everyone should play the game and everyone should score the goals like everyone else is doing. Family pressure to work. So in a food insecure household or in a space where there isn't much money, oftentimes there's pressure to go and work. So instead of, it's almost a luxury to be able to say, I can delay earning money for 3 to 4 years in order to go and study, so that one day I can earn something, when actually there's a real need that today my younger sister still needs to go to school. She needs a school uniform, or she needs school books, or she needs food to eat. So how can I delay that for another 4 years? And then poverty. This is the litany. We know how these things affect people, yet year on year we act surprised when we see the results. We act surprised when those things get published in the newspaper and we see the difference in performances, which actually only serve to confirm what we see in the rest of society. What we see in terms of economic disparity and economic inequality is inevitably going to be reflected in school as well, and even in school results. So what are we doing in response? It's not just a problem of how our students are positioned on the field, but it's also a problem of what stances schools take towards such students. And when I say these stances, I don't just mean, I mean across all scales, from micro through the meso, through to the macro level, across scale. So even at a structural level, yes, but even at the level of the school, where you might find a black educator, in a classroom teaching mostly black students, you will still find the symbolic violence. You will still find it articulating in other ways in terms of class differences. Oh, so we're both colored people, but this person lives over here, and we're a little better off, or our family's a little better like this. You see that articulated in the classroom, and it plays out in different ways. So these kids aren't academic enough, right? Or they need a little bit more hands-on work. If they could get an opportunity to do something with their hands, maybe they are more talented in that way. We don't think about what we actually mean when we use these statements, and how we actually categorize people, and how we actually take a deficit view of students when we do this. Or we blame the parents. They're not at home. They've got problems. They're on drugs. It's the community. Or it manifests in stances like, you know what, I'll use corporal punishment because actually this is the only thing which these children understand. I was going to share with you the little study in terms of how this plays out. Maybe just 30 seconds of it is, it's really interesting that even in a neighborhood in Cape Town, where the majority of students are speaking Afrikaans, that you will struggle to find an Afrikaans medium school where you can actually be schooled in Afrikaans. And if you can find that, to find one where you could actually study the subject choices which you might need to enter into the kinds of fields of study that you wanted to do. Recently, our organization was actually kicked out of a school for challenging the school related to a language issue like this. And I mean, this is Afrikaans in a neighborhood in Grassy Park, but think beyond this in terms of what it means for other language speakers like isiXhosa, isiZulu, and so on a massive scale in South Africa. I guess the point that I maybe want to leave you with, I'm skipping some slides. The biggest barrier to ending inequity is those of us who benefit from the system. We all sitting here benefit from the system, right? We all are compromised in various ways, in different ways, in aspects of our lives. If not in schooling, then elsewhere. I myself, standing here as someone who advocates for justice in education, is someone who was part of the massive exodus that happened in the early 1990s when a lot of us shifted out of schools in urban townships into former Model C education systems or private schooling systems. What does that do? It concentrates wealth and capital in certain spaces and robs other spaces of those very things. In fact, if we want to change this, we need to move in the opposite direction, and which is an incredibly hard thing to do, an incredibly difficult choice to make. So yeah, thank you guys.